On today's episode of Hollyweird Paranormal, we surface from our little hiatus as we team up with our podern friends, Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh of LA Not So Confidential. Come and join the banter and the round table discussion as we sit down and talk about LA, Deidre Hall's possible possession storyline return on Days of Our Lives, and finally, the True Crime and Paranormal Association of the Barclay Hotel. You'll finally learn and understand why Bryce Mitchell-Williams takes the stairs instead of the elevator. Well, it just so happens that the Barclay Hotel has a lot of history and a lot of tragedy and quite a few ghosts. Learn the many freak accidents, murders, and even serial killers that resided within the walls of the Barclay Hotel. Then we go into the Paranormal Association. It turns out that this hotel has a lot of ghost stories, but for some reason, those who've experienced the hauntings there have a hard time sharing these stories. Well, could it be the ghosts of LA's past? Or could it be something else, something a little more sinister? Well, you gotta stay tuned. So grab your iced coffee, your favorite delicious cocktail, or hell, even grab your salt lamp because you might want to lick it after listening to the True Crime and Paranormal Association of the Barclay Hotel as we get Hollyweird Not So Confidential with our friends from LA Not So Confidential.
Ghost stories are always scarier when they're told by the very people who experienced them. Hi, I'm Becky.
And I'm Diana.
And we're the hosts of the Homespun Haints podcast.
We talk to people just like you who've come face to face with ghosts, demons, haints, and other strange paranormal phenomena. All of it makes for a chilling good time.
So grab yourself a sweet tea, turn off the lights, and listen to some eerie, true ghost stories on Homespun Haints, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm not scared. Are you?
Hey guys, welcome to another wonderful and long-awaited episode of Hollyweird Paranormal Podcast. We are your hosts, Tammy Merhab Chavez.
Hi, I'm Bryce Mitchell-Williams.
And welcome back. I know it's been a while, and
many minutes.
We've taken a much needed yet longer break than usual. We just wanted to say thank you for everyone who voiced their concern, but don't worry, we were coming back. A lot of things happened. We had a lot of great personal endeavors, transitions, and Bryce had to be in quarantine for the 100th time, unfortunately.
I know, yeah.
So we are back and we have a great treat for you. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who messaged me in regards to Hurricane Ida. For those of you that don't know or are just joining us for the first time, I'm originally from New Orleans. And yes, Ida hit and devastated parts of Louisiana, and my family is fine. They knew what to do. They evacuated in time and they're safe. And fortunately, miraculously, their homes are fine. So thank you guys so much for those loving and conserved messages. But let's move forward with our special guests. We've been on their podcast several times and we were like, let's get them on today's episode because we have a little plug to put into this episode. On October 9th, we're going to have a meet and greet with our listeners, with our podern friends from LA Not So Confidential. We have Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hi, guys.
Hey, guys.
Guys. We're so excited. I just realized, I was like, Bryce, we haven't had them on the podcast yet. He was like,
I know. It's so crazy because it's like time is a myth anyway. And I think that it's still like, I don't know, roughly 2012. So yeah. I was actually, when we were getting ready this morning, I was like, oh my God, when we all met over at the Grove, that was like years ago. Like years.
A long-standing love affair.
Plural.
Yes, that was.
Well, y'all have Stockholm
one of the best
syndrome,
Tinder dates we've ever
happened. I think that's really the explanation. You have Stockholm syndrome. We're very lucky.
We are. I mean,
but that was literally years ago.
Even to be blessed by the appearance of
what is it, Evan Peters?
Yes.
And
Emma Roberts were there.
Emma Roberts. So we were like, oh, this was meant to be.
It was a very Hollywood experience. Like, what's happening right now?
As we're shoveling pancakes into our face.
Oh, right. Like, no shame.
Coffee. It was perfection.
But if you're not going to eat carbs in front of a celebrity, like, you're not living. So
right? Not doing it right. Exactly.
Yeah.
This is so delicious, Emma.
Yeah, punish them for being wealthier and more beautiful than you by eating carbs.
I was like polishing my butter knife, going like,
I know.
What are they doing now? What are they doing now?
Like some of us are like trying to do the thing with our phone, like right. Like, smile, Scott. I know. Zoomed in past his shoulder.
The best like Hollywood secret that I don't think people realize when you don't live here, and I certainly didn't, because all you see is on television. So they're like glamorous and beautiful. When you see celebrities in real life, it is a 50-50 shot of if it's like a homeless doppelganger or the celebrity themselves, because they looked ragged. Like, no judgment, all God's children. But like when they walked in, I was like, oh, okay.
Well, interestingly enough, there's been studies on this, because one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that what photographs really well for television and film looks odd in person. Like, if you've ever seen Ben Affleck in person, and my one encounter with Ben Affleck, very nice guy, he is enormous with like a huge Mardi Gras sized head. And it's something that photographs really well. It's like all the stars are just walking popsicles. They're like skinny bodies with big heads.
Is a perfect example of that. Like, she literally looks like a head really well, with just like toothpicks for legs and arms. Right. I love her. I love all of these.
I do too.
But,
yeah. But then they also, the camera does add weight. I mean, when I was working at NBC, I remember going over to the commissary for lunch, and I would see all the Days of Our Lives people come over, and Deidre Hall would come out and like get her tray and pick up like 2 pieces of celery and a radish, and that would be her lunch. And she was gorgeous, still gorgeous today, but like just like as big around as your finger. And then on camera you would go, oh, she's got a really nice regular shape. I mean, camera's so not weird, especially not fair to women. You brought up Deidre Hall. Did you see that they're bringing back the demon story, the possession storyline?
Yes.
Oh,
I heard that. Yes, I'm so excited. That freaked me out in high school when I would,
because why not
that storyline? Yes.
Do you remember that big latex demon that like kept materializing in the hospital room?
Oh yes, I remember when she had the split piece soup moment with Father Black, but I remember Father John Black in Days of Our Life. I was like, wow, okay, that man
hilarious
is a priest with great hair.
Mullet priest.
The mullet priest, yes. It was so bad that it was so good, that storyline.
But that's why we love soap. I mean, and that's interesting. That stuff's kind of disappeared from daytime television, really. Like, that was fun stuff, though.
Deidre Hall got to bring it back. And then split pea soup, of course. Well, guys, on October 9th, I just want to reiterate that we will be having a meet and greet with our Podern friends at the NBC Bar and Grill in Universal Studios in Hollywood, California. I believe it's in City Walk, right? The NBC Bar and Grill. Yes. So we'll be there from 5 till 7 and then enter the park and then participate in the amazing mazes. Join us as we brace ourselves around Bryce. We create a human shield of comfort and safety. He still is feeling a little indifferent about it. So.
The thing that's so funny is that like all of my friends and like people from the school, like I know so many people who work the mazes. Like every year people are posting like so excited to be back at like Halloween Horror Nights. Like this is great. I see all the makeup. And it's like, I know that it's not real, obviously. Like, I'm not a child, except that I'm 100% a child. And I need the, like, safety light that means I can't be scared. And,
it's the jump scares for me.
I'm just going to go to the Harry Potter world.
Out of nowhere.
Oh, my gosh. You'll have a blast. You'll be dragging us back every year.
Yeah.
We'll bring some hot brownies.
It's a great adrenaline rush. I love them. I mean, I just think I love that I laugh uncontrollably, like even when I'm scared. I mean,
it's your defense
actually,
mechanism.
It's actually not a really good thing in real situations, but Yeah, I love the jump scares and just dissolving into laughter. It's a lot of fun. And also, they make so much money at Universal, and they put a lot of people to work for a good portion. Like a lot of people can make a good chunk of money,
especially after this like last 18 months of just
Right?
like, no work for any actors.
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
But even if you don't go into the park, and I get it, like it can be expensive and people are still worried about, you know, health and things like that. We were talking about on our show how we were comfortable with it because it's outside. You can wear your mask, you can, you know, wash your hands as much as possible. But if you don't go in, come have a beer with us.
Absolutely.
And, you know, all you have to do is really pay for parking and come hang out with us at City Walk for a little bit.
And there's a lot of stuff to do up there, even if you don't do Hollywood Horror Nights.
Yeah, it's fun. It's worth it, guys. Come and hang out with us, have a beer, have some cheese sticks with Bryce, you know, just as long as there's cheese sticks, we're all good in the hood. All right.
Yes.
And maybe just throw in a couple of CBD gummies for Bryce so he can go in and just feel great, loopy.
Perfect.
All right, so we're going to be talking about one of the most, in my opinion, fight me on this, the most haunted and violent hotel in downtown. And I don't think it's the Cecil, guys. I don't even think it's the Alexandria. It is the Barclay Hotel, aka Old School Van Nuys Hotel.
Yeah.
So we are going to be talking about the many, many, many crimes of this hotel. Like, I mean, when I think of the Cecil, it's like nothing in comparison to this hotel or any hotel for that matter in Los Angeles. I was shocked.
It's that thing where you start reading and like, right, we've all heard like, okay, yeah, I know some things about it. And then you start reading about everything that happened there and it just keeps going. Oh my God, like again, another one? Like, oh, okay. So this is just a block that I will never go on. Like,
from the moment that it was in the process of being built to the moment where you started to see the cracks and the deterioration of this beautiful hotel. I mean, it just is a constant rotation of just bad luck and crimes. So real quickly, we're just going to go over the bullet points of the history of the hotel, just to give you guys a background, and also the first two freak accidents. And then Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh will go over the crimes and murders and the two, not one, there were two serial killers that resided in this hotel. And what occurred there is unbelievable. It's like something straight out of a horror movie for sure. And then we'll go into the Paranormal Association. Is there a paranormal residue in the hotel? Well, there is. We just have been having a hard time trying to get good ghost stories, because I guess it's so intense over there that, I mean, people don't want to share these personal experiences. So
we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I think it is one of those situations where the people who have experienced things are, no pun completely intended, but they're genuinely haunted by what they've experienced. So it's just like, oh goodness, like they don't want to talk about it. These like people say one thing and then they're done. They're like, I'm sorry. It's just very intense. Whereas like other hotels, the Roosevelt comes to mind. It's like people can't wait to talk about it because it's like cute and fun and like your features there and it's like all fine. Like everyone wants to see
movie
Marilyn.
star ghosts.
Yeah. This is like not that situation at all, which if you've been to Los Angeles, like even the areas in the city that these two hotels are reflect that. Like Hollywood Boulevard, where the Roosevelt is like cute and it's campy and there's tourists and like you go and get
haunted mansion.
It totally is. It's like the theme park version, and then you go downtown and you're like,
the Barclay,
we're not safe.
like
the
we're just not version of hotels. Yeah, it is.
But it is a prettier building than the Cecil, which is just like this big giant block. You know, this big enormous structure. But at least the Barclay has some architecture to it. I've never been inside. I've seen some photos, but it's a more aesthetically pleasing building. And right now, if you guys go down there, they have this really cool art installation on top of the building with 3 big giant crows perched on top looking down at the street, which is really, really cool.
Yes. If you guys are following us on Instagram, Shiloh put it up on LA Not So Confidential, and I know she tagged us on it, and we put it on our Instagram story. It was hilarious. It looked like It looked like the monkeys from Wizard of Oz. They were so cute, right?
Exactly.
So large. I was like,
the birds.
Tippy.
All right, so let's go into the history, a little bit of the history, and then the dark history, and then the ghost of the Barclay, guys. So in order to begin, we need to go all the way back, and we're going to go all the way back to the early 20th century. So the Barclay was once called the Van Nuys Hotel, which is located off of 101 4th Street. And this hotel also was built not too far away from the Broadway sister location. So there was another Van Nuys Hotel that was called the Van Nuys Hotel. And this one comes into play with another story that we'll, share very soon. The Van Nuys Hotel was an investment property by SoCal pioneer Isaac Van Nuys, hence the name Van Nuys Hotel. It's a 6-story Beaux-Arts building at 4th and Main, claimed its first casualty. So we already have a casualty in the works in September of 1896, a James McNally. And during its construction, according to newspaper reports, McNally, in company with other workmen, was engaged in hoisting a large oil tank, and the rope broke and the tank fell with a crash. Now, McNally's right kneecap was broken. He was badly cut over the right eye and bruised over the body, but he made a full recovery, and the building was soon completed. So already there's this close call with McNally, but it's just like this omen that opens the door for all this tragedy.
Just kill me if my kneecap ever gets
right.
I know.
That's literally the first thing I
kneecaps.
thought too. I've dislocated my knee so many times. The thought of shattering your kneecap, I'm not trying to live out misery. I'm good, thank you. Finish the story, Paul. But
okay, well now I'm just squeeged. We haven't even gotten to the haunting stuff, and I'm squeeged out by your knee problems. Ow!
What was the scariest thing out of this podcast? Bryce's knee.
100%.
It's the kneecaps, and then the hip, and then your liver, right? Those are the 3 most.
Well, I sold my liver years ago, so
yes, pay rent.
Bye.
Reality
it's a good thing you have another one to rely on.
Yeah, exactly. That's anatomy.
So the Van Nuys Hotel opened its doors to the public in January 19th of 1897, and it was the first hotel to provide telephone and electronic service to every room. There were 32 rooms on each floor with 60 private baths and 10 public baths, and it only took $275,000 to build, which I'm sure in today's money is millions and millions. Now, the first 2 deaths were freak accidents, and it's due to the fact that the invention and introduction of the elevator was still in its earlier stages. So there were going to be many malfunctions and problems with the introduction of this new machine. We see this accident occur inside the hotel with a bellhop by the name of Earl R. Newton. So this one actually occurred not in the Van Nuys Hotel off of 4th, the one that we're talking about. This actually happened in the Van Nuys Hotel in Broadway. And so I feel like a lot of people get this story confused with the 4th Street location. And this is stated in J.M. Moore's book, The Barclay Hotel. In June of 1900, a young girl was trying to holler at a cute girl walking past the elevator, and he was sticking his hat out hey girl, hey Shawty, give me your number.
Oh God.
Yes. So he grabs a hold of the power rope for balance as he's sticking out his head from the inside of the elevator. And this is what triggered the elevator to start moving on its own towards the top of the floor. So it was so quick that Earl didn't react in time. And the bottom half of his body was still in the elevator, while the upper part of his body was overhanging in the second floor. So his torso got caught between the elevator and I guess top edge of that doorway of the elevator and the floor. And this caused his internal organs to be crushed, along with having a massive blood rush to his head, which caused his head to turn completely purple. So yes, this was the first death, and poor Earl pretty much suffered a really gruesome death right here. J.M. Moore also states in his book that this account conflicts of one from an article of the LA Times that stated that Earl was dusting the top of the elevator where he got caught and was crushed, which may have been confused for Charles Gamble. And this leads me into the next freak accident. So the hotel had only been open for 2 months, and this is the one that we're talking about, which is off of 4th, when tragedy struck, and leading to this horrific death of a waiter by the name of Charles Gamble. Now, according to the LA Times, Gamble was one of the 2 waiters whose duty is to deliver meals to the various rooms, and he was sent to the 3rd floor to get a tray of dishes and returned by the elevator. And when the cage neared the 1st floor, the elevator boy, Robert White, turned the wheel of the lever the wrong way. And instead of stopping, the cage started up to the top again. And as they neared the 3rd floor, the elevator boy reached for the door, opened it, and he just jumped out, leaving the elevator moving and Gamble inside. So apparently Gamble became frightened, for he tried to get out also. As he stepped forward, stooping the top of the doorway, it caught him and threw him forward, the floor of the elevator rising and pinning his legs above the thighs. Trigger warning, they snapped like stems.
Too late.
Yeah.
According to the LA Times, they snapped like pipe stems, and the machine still going up held him by 1 foot only. And finally,
is this the plot for Final Destination? Because it sounds.
I feel like it is. It is really gruesome how a lot of these freak accidents occurred, but they all, surfaced and, rose around this elevator. This was something that people were not familiar with, and they didn't know how this machine worked. They were just like, okay, if curiosity killed the cat was a person, unfortunately, it would be these people, because
I just feel like it would take a lot. It takes a lot to get me to use the stairs, but I'm not going in the elevator. Like, I can't. That was like at the school we used to work at, Tam. That elevator was a literal death trap. I was like, if I don't have to go in that elevator, I'm good. I'll walk all 4 flights. Like, no.
It would be fast, and then it will gain speed. And by the time you get to the top floor, it would stop, and then it would do this. It would
there was like
bounce up and down. Like, is it going
it would be like uneven with the floor, so if you weren't paying attention, you'd like go to walk into it and it'd be like a foot down. You'd like fall into the elevator.
Oh my god.
So I'm already like primed to hate elevators, and then this story, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I don't have my legs snapped off, so
well, and you should think like 100 years after the elevator has come about that it would be okay, right?
Nope. Doesn't matter. So. Still afraid.
Yeah, even back then, like, people were afraid of elevators, and to this very day, we are still afraid of them.
Yeah.
So poor Gamble, he's dangling by 1 foot, and then all of a sudden he lost his grip and he went headfirst down the shaft. He suffered many fractures to the head and jawline. He also lost his left eye, and that is all according to the LA Times and the LA Herald as well. Over the next few years, more elevator accidents would occur, one of which in 1901 took the life of Joe Cato, a hotel employee. He was also another looky-loo. He was curious about the operations of the elevator. And, well, he was looking down the elevator shaft one evening, only to have his head crushed by a 5,000-pound weight of the elevator. So he was looking at this.
How fast is this elevator going? Like...
I'm sure it's probably gaining speed as it's coming down from the 6th floor. And
yes, but Jesus.
I don't think it's processing in their mind that this thing is coming down, because the way that these elevators are built is just, it has a cage accordion door, like a metal accordion door that you open, and that's it. We don't have the 2 doors, separating from one another and then closing together in the middle. I'm sure what ended up happening is someone didn't close the cage door, and poor Cato was like, oh, what's down the shaft? And before you know it.
Well, those are everything you're talking about, Timmy, also are what we, our safety standards today. People will bitch about regulations, federal regulations and state regulations, but that's why those things exist, is because people's heads kept getting chopped off, Of course, like, I'm the type of person, I'm so fascinated by any kind of new technology. I would totally be the one sticking my, how does this work? Boom. I'm telling,
that's why we have safety procedures and safety protocols nowadays. So this wasn't the case for the Barclay, and unfortunately, Joe Cato lost his life. Now, it doesn't say anything about his head being decapitated. It just says that his head was crushed. So I don't know if this is in reference to the so-called headless bellhop ghost story or legend that is attached to the Barclay that will definitely reach towards after we talk about the crimes of the hotel. So I'll pass the mic over to Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh, because they're going to take us down this treacherous road of these horrific crimes.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a plethora of all types of crimes to choose from.
Where do we start?
We're just going to focus on murder. Like many of the buildings and hotels built in downtown LA at the turn of the century, there is a sordid history of gruesome, violent crimes all throughout the decades. One of the earliest victims of murder inside the hotel was an employee. So in 1902, there is not a lot of information on this at all, but the kitchen staff butcher was involved in a knife fight with another kitchen worker, and he did not survive. His name was Evan Roberts. And I mean, if a butcher can't win a knife fight, what does that mean for any of us?
Seriously.
Right? I know. I don't know why I have Just Beat It in my head, like with the knife fight.
Like they're tied together and wielding their knives.
But in really clean leather jackets.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yes.
Very choreographed.
So that was only a couple years after the hotel even opened.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes up when Shiloh was doing the research, as she was like organizing bullet points, I found it so interesting that they focused on the fact that LA was growing so quickly. And because of the weather that there, and, you know, and the sort of the promise of go west, young man, and get rich, there were tons of transitional/transient people coming and going from the downtown area. No matter how nice a hotel was, right around the corner was likely going to be a flop house of some kind, you know. So there was a lot of transient people moving through Los Angeles at the time. So one of the real mysteries that we found, you know, that adds to this sort of compilation of crimes is in 1937, Elizabeth Rice was a wealthy 71-year-old woman from Akron, Ohio. Now, she decided at 71 she was going to take a solo trip around the Panama Canal and then end up in Los Angeles. And clearly, almost 100 years ago, there's no Yelp. There's no way to really check the area, like calling or like, what is this area like that I'm going to be driven to after I get off the boat? There's no way to really confirm any of that. She checked into the Barclay on December 29th. And by then it was going through really its first phase as a rundown hotel, even though it had really been built only a couple of decades before. So a few days later, a housekeeper found her seated in a chair in her hotel room with her skull severely fractured. Articles of her clothing were scattered all around the room. The bedding was saturated with blood, and the murder weapon was still in the room. It was a brick, and it had been placed in the bloody sheets on the woman's bed. Now, what's weird is the motive didn't appear to be robbery, because Elizabeth still wore a very large diamond ring and a gold watch sat on her dresser, and it doesn't look like there's any evidence of other valuables being taken from the room, unless there was something specific that person was going for. And we don't, historically, that's going to be lost to us, I think. Several months later, a mother and her 12-year-old daughter were murdered in the exact same way in their apartment on Olive Street, which is very close by. And that motive was determined to be sexual in nature, as the suspect was referred to as a sex maniac. So is it someone that had access to the hotel room? Did they even bother to check to see if a 71-year-old woman had any kind of sexual trauma?
Right.
You know, historically, that might not have happened.
Yeah, exactly. It was left in some newspapers as just a mystery. Like, we don't know what happened at all. It looks kind of weird. It wasn't robbery. But then if you look at the newspaper articles a little bit later, this horrific crime happens with the woman and her daughter, and they end up arresting somebody and connecting him to this crime as well, because he used a brick in both cases.
Wow.
So those are just, chronologically some of the highlights. But we wanted to really highlight and discuss 2 serial killers that completely terrorized downtown Los Angeles, really like 3 decades apart. And they both hunted at the Hotel Barclay. So Scott, you want to talk about the LA slasher in the 40s?
Oh, yeah, I mean, and just to drop a note, thanks for that intro into this, just to drop a note that for LA Not So Confidential, we had a Patreon and listener meetup downtown utilizing an absolutely fantastic downtown haunted and crimes tour that was absolutely one of the best produced walking tours I've ever seen. And this guy gave us a lot of information about this hotel in particular. But to focus on really the first big serial killer that was noted was the LA slasher. So in 1944, on November 15th, badly mutilated bodies of 2 women were found at separate hotels in downtown LA. And of course, theme of the episode today, one of them was there at the Barclay. The first victim was 25-year-old Virgie Lee Griffin. She was discovered at 2 p.m. on November 15th. She had been staying at the Barclay and her body had been found stuffed into a clothes closet. There was a large butcher knife and a razor found in the room next to her body, and she was mutilated in some pretty horrific ways, which is all part of public record. I think this is going back to Tammy as you let us in. This is really important to note that newspapers at that time had absolutely no boundaries when it came to listing legs being snapped like pipe cleaners and eyes being gouged out, too much blood, things you would actually never think about would be in the LA Times or, a supposedly reputable newspaper would never publish those things now. It was determined that Virgie had been murdered, or at least she expired at around 8 a.m. that morning. And I guess the murderer had to get an early start because he went on to murder another woman that very same day.
Damn.
The second victim was 38-year-old Lillian Johnson. She was discovered just after 3:30 p.m. And Lillian was really badly mutilated. And it was noted in even public reports that her breasts and vagina had been dissected.
Yes. So Google LA slasher.
Yes.
Right.
That was I learned the hard way. You could still find pictures of the postmortem, like the crime scene.
It just flashes up. Yeah, there's flashes up on your web screen when you do a search. Absolutely.
Very disturbing.
While the death investigations were ongoing, a description of the suspect was pulled out and distributed to all patrolmen on duty with LAPD. And there was a patrolman, H.E. Donlin. He recalled seeing a man who fit the description earlier in the day while he was doing his foot beat near 3rd and Hill Streets. He decided to check out the bars because he figured the suspect could be picking up women in sort of those establishments. Let's find somebody who's already inebriated and kind of not going to be all together. So at 5:30 p.m., he entered a bar at 326 South Hill Street, just a few doors from where Lillian Johnson was found at the Barclay. So in this dark bar, he noticed a man was drinking a glass of wine and chatting up this woman. And the man was holding a book of matches from Hotel Barclay.
Damn.
So the man was arrested. His name was Otto Stephen Wilson. And when he was taken into custody, his hands were found to be stained with blood, and he had a razor in his pocket. So I guess that's why the dark bar was working, is you just didn't want to bother go washing your hands. Hey, it's dark in here. Who's going to see? Maybe they'll think it's wine because I'm drinking wine. He did confess to the 2 murders by 7:30 p.m. And he just stated that he started having impulses to kill about 3 months earlier. So they did a little bit of a history on him. The medical discharge from the Navy for what was then called sexual psychosis. And when they interviewed his wife, she reported that he had once waited for her to get out of the shower and then sliced her buttocks with a razor and began to lick at the drops of blood.
Oh my gosh.
So interesting. Sexual psychosis, it's almost... When we as psychologists looking sort of at evaluative and diagnostic criteria, when we hear something like this from, decades ago, we can't use our current diagnostic criteria. We have to go back to, well, what did that mean at the time? And probably what that discharge meant was that he had raped several women and had shown no remorse. And they
was
were just
acting
like,
out
let's get him out.
sexually in
Right.
some capacity, who knows?
Wow.
But clearly there were issues working all the way up until that day.
Now, were these women like just random women that he would find on the street, or were they prostitutes?
They didn't say, but I know that the first victim, Virgie, when they checked in together as husband and wife.
Oh.
So it sounds like he just had met her, and maybe from the night before, because it was determined that she was killed at about 8 a.m., remember? So I don't know if they had spent the night together. Again, it's hard to piece together some of this stuff from the newspaper reports.
Yeah.
Whether or not they were, or he was picking them up in bars during the day. I mean, maybe we can kind of allude to that since it was daytime. But, this was the 40s, this is prime, like Black Dahlia and lipstick murders. And some of the homicide detectives that worked the LA slasher case were the same ones that worked the Dahlia murders. So it was just a wild time down there.
Yeah. What a time to be alive during that era.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's like, it's such a toss up. Like, I always wonder, was it the 40s or the 80s that was the most deadliest decade? And it's such a tie. I feel like it's neck and neck.
Well, let me tell you about the mid 70s, and you can decide right now.
Segue. We love segues.
So this other serial killer, 3 decades later, just about, is the Skid Row slasher. So we got another slasher in that same few blocks of area. And this was Vaughn Greenwood. He was responsible for a number of murders and violent attacks, both here in LA and also in Chicago, basically spanning 10 years, starting in 1964 to 1975. And there is a very interesting Hollywood tie-in to this story. But he was from the Midwest. He made his way to the West Coast, earning a living as a migrant field worker. And he committed his first known murder out here at the age of 20. And his first murder, the start of his murder spree, he killed 2 homeless men in back-to-back days in November of 1964, slashing their throats and stabbing them repeatedly. And one of them was left literally on the steps of the LA Central Public Library.
Oh, weird.
So people coming in that morning, the workers found this body there. He then went to Chicago and was suspected for 2 more similar attacks. He was acquitted, actually, of one man's murder before returning to Los Angeles 10 years later to start his murder spree again. So when he went to Chicago, he was still preying on a homeless population, but they really couldn't ever tie him. Well, they tied him enough to arrest him and try him for the murder, but he was acquitted. So he comes back to LA, and between December of 1974 and February of 1975, just really like a 3-month span, Greenwood killed several victims on Skid Row. And then he moves on to the Hollywood area, both areas with still a high transient homeless population. And it's like that to this day, unfortunately. I know, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it really has been decades long here in the Los Angeles area that these are areas that people can prey on the destitute. So his 7th victim in this spree, so there were many, but his 7th victim was Samuel Suarez, and he was a drifter who was staying in room 528 of the Barclay Hotel. And he was found there the next morning, having been killed by Greenwood. And Greenwood would cut their throats from ear to ear, some, trigger warning, some down to the spine. And there was evidence that the killer drank the blood of the victims. So he had left cups of blood in the areas of where the victims' bodies were, including rings of salt around the corpses. The shoes were also removed from the victims and then pointed back at the victims, which is interesting because back then, you're talking about the 70s and 80s, there's this whole concept of satanic panic, right?
Yeah.
So of course, Scott and I looked into this and we're like, this is nothing. This is someone with clearly psychosis, probably doing something that he thinks is satanic in nature, perhaps. Sure. Yeah. But certainly the newspapers and the cops kind of ran with that. There was also some unexplained and cryptic markings and mutilations on the body and around the wounds. Don't know exactly what that was, but that just kind of fed into that whole thing of the sort of vampirism, satanic panic issue. His 10th victim could have been the actor Burt Reynolds. When he moved on to Hollywood.
Not Burt. No.
And his mustache.
I know.
Dr. Shiloh, say it's not so.
Well, spoiler alert, it was not Burt Reynolds.
Oh, thank God. We can continue on then.
Yeah. When he moved over into the Hollywood area, one night he broke into Burt Reynolds' home, was basically lying in wait for him to get home. But Burt Reynolds was out on the town with Dinah Shore that night. And he talks about this actually in an interview on her show. And the guy waits around, gets bored, leaves, and actually breaks into a home just up from Burt Reynolds, attacking two men who lived there.
Oh my.
And in the meantime, those men survive. One of them actually fights with him so hard that they fall out a window, and the Skid Row slasher goes running. But he runs past Burt Reynolds' house just as Burt Reynolds is kind of stumbling in from his night out. Burt Reynolds looks out the window, sees this dude literally dressed in the outfit from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly that Clint Eastwood had given Burt Reynolds. So he stole his clothes while he was waiting for him.
God, that's so creepy.
That is so disturbing.
Ooh.
And he said he just slowly walks by him and they lock eyes. And then his neighbor comes crawling into his home with his stomach stabbed, asking for help. So Burt Reynolds actually had to testify at the trial. He said that he did some testimony on the witness stand, and then as he was leaving out through the courtroom, he had to walk past Vaughn Greenwood, and he said that Vaughn Greenwood was just writing on a notepad over and over again, must kill Burt Reynolds, must kill Burt Reynolds. And it's kind of creepy because Burt Reynolds said, when someone asked him, well, what did this guy look like? And Vaughn Greenwood was a very large black man. Yeah. And he said, he looked like O.J. Simpson, which was such weird foreshadowing.
Yeah, which you can watch that clip on YouTube of him on the Dinah Shore show telling the story. And I think that he discovered the neighbor had already made it into his house and was crawling through the kitchen, holding his intestines in because he had been cut so badly.
Yeah. So Greenwood gets arrested after that incident because as he's fleeing in the Hollywood Hills, he drops a piece of mail that was in his pocket that had his address and his name on it.
Wow.
So the cops finally put together, because it's the same MO from Hollywood to Skid Row. And he was convicted of 9 counts of murder in January 1977 and sentenced to life imprisonment.
Oh my God.
But again,
one thing I would add, I never want to go too far into the satanic panic thing because so much of that is non-legitimate at all. However, in some Southern magic practices, and there's one, you don't lump them all in. There's a lot of different things down there in the South. Positioning of shoes actually is a very big thing in when you're trying to harm someone, like pointing them in or pointing them out or putting things in shoes. Now, once again, the guy could have just been completely psychotic and never even been to the Deep South or had any exposure to that. But I did find that interesting as we were looking at that case.
Yeah. So we have the victims of 2 serial killers found at the Barclay.
Damn.
And this is why I really think this place is much more violent than any of the other places, because of just the types of serial killers that stayed there and the crimes that they committed there were just so unimaginable. I mean, that is crazy.
Really hardcore. This is not light stuff at all. These are like significant historical events that seem to all have this weird intersection, you know, at that particular geographical location.
Yeah.
And it turns out that, I mean, there was still a heavy cloud over this hotel because after that, it turns into, I guess, low-income apartments.
Right.
And especially during that time, during the 70s, I think it was still functioning as that. And it went through a series of fires. It went through 3 different types of fires from what I researched here too. And I know the last 2, there's one where it did claim a couple, I think 1 life. And the other 2 that were to follow, fortunately, no one, you know, had a pass from, you know, those 2 incidents. So it just seemed like there was this constant heavy cloud over this hotel. And like Dr. Scott, you mentioned before, I mean, it was just the area and the time. And I feel like this hotel was just put in an area where it just faced a lot of dark times in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
In your opinions, and this is just like an open question for everyone, like, do you think it was the location, or do you think like just the energy that it absorbed from people coming in and out, from a lot of transients coming in and out throughout the decades? Did it absorb so much of the negativity during, you know, that time, during that era? I know it went through the Great Depression. It also had witnessed, you know, people going through the trials and tribulations of the world wars and so on and so forth. What do you guys think?
I feel like it really grew with Los Angeles. And we've talked about this, and we did a whole vintage series of kind of Los Angeles noir crimes from that time period. And the city was such a reflection of just the explosion in population, the different types of people that were coming here, the corruption, the organized crime that was there very early. And then as a result of all those devastating national events, like you're talking about, whether it's economic depressions or wars and veterans coming back, it's just really the center and the heart of LA. Now, in more recent decades, obviously, like this border Skid Row, like really right on the border. Skid Row is getting bigger and bigger, I feel, every single month. But then there's a lot of resources for the unhoused down there. So the shelters, you know, the soup kitchens, all of that. So you have that population that has grown and found resources there. And so many of these old hotels have become SRO housing, the single resident occupancy housing, just because people need to be off the street. I mean, even the Cecil right now, which is not open, not functioning for anything, they still have about a dozen SRO residents there. So you can see lights on in there at night.
Yes.
There are people, I know.
A lot of people are like, look, it's haunted. If you go on TikTok and you like click on the hashtag Cecil, it is ridiculous just how people are like, no, it's haunted. I saw a light flicker on it. And I'm like, there's still people living there. That are low income. And from what I was told, it was originally supposed to be a hotel. I think they were going to cut half of the complex into hotels and the other into SROs. But I think now they're going to completely do the whole entire building as SROs, I think, from here on out.
The last I heard was that a New York developer owns it. There are some city ordinances that a particular percentage has to be SRO. But the last that Scott and I heard, especially we were talking to some friends that were in the documentary of the Cecil Hotel. And I know some, I will say, colleagues of mine that work down there that are familiar with the establishment, that they are planning on doing a high-end hotel in part of it, including a rooftop swimming pool, which sounds terribly
so bizarre,
like exploitative. with the whole Elisa Lam issue. But
they're going to have a lot of dark tourism.
We just veered off your original question.
I mean, so what I would say is that, and I'm, Shiloh and I are typical Mulder and Scully. I'm more, I am more skeptical than I was in my youth, but I do think that there's a lot of factors that come to bear. So we've talked about economic factors, we talk about explosive growth and population, and then like who's funding the hotels that keep it up, and then it comes down, or over the decades it's clean, it's functioning hotel, then it becomes low income housing. But I do think that and I don't here, this is so weird, so excuse me for my soapbox, but one of the things when we talk about the idea of the term supernatural is that's such a misnomer, because nothing supersedes nature. There's only the idea of that there are things out there that we don't yet understand, that we can't quantify, and we quantify things now in this decade that 100 years ago would have been thought to be magic in many ways, in our use of technology. So in the same way that and this is a broad reach, so apologize to any statisticians out there, but when they've done extensive studies on perpetrators of rape, sexually violent predators, what we have found out is that they are so feral, advanced feral in their perception of victims, that they pick out victims instantaneously on the street.
Wow.
That's a victim. Can't get her. That's a potential victim. I mean, it's that quick.
Wow.
And they've talked about it in multiple interviews. So I think that there's on another level that there's always the possibility that instinctually people are pulled towards where they're going to be victims. And but what is that about? Is it about olfactory senses that we don't know that we have? Or is it intuition that is used for, nefarious purposes? I'm convinced that there is something there that draws them. I think that it's right now we call it coincidence, but there is something else out there operating, that people gravitate towards locations where horrific things have happened. I mean, I think that Ryan Murphy and his American Horror Story concepts of using as the murder house is sort of a fictionalized version of that just people are drawn towards this.
Absolutely. There is this monument, this thing that just attracts everyone from all walks of life that have this one thing in common. Whether it's this dark, as I like to call it, and
it's a vibe, right?
It's a vibe. Yeah. It's we all have dark passengers. I'm taking this from the show Dexter, but I really, when he brings up his dark passenger, I'm yes, I feel like everyone, no matter how great we are, we have that dark passenger in our mind. And that
mine just eats uncontrollably. Mine just will not fucking stop eating. That's who my dark passenger.
That is your dark passenger. He's you want to go to the hamburger habit, don't you?
Look, Randy's Donuts is right around the corner. They have a fresh apple fritter. Look at the apple fritter. Smell the apple fritter.
Do it.
Well, it turns out too, back in June of 2017, the hotel did take its last victim. As of right now, I don't know if you guys were familiar with this case, but it was the passing of firefighter Kelly Wong. I do. Yeah. Just in June of 2017, I guess Kelly Wong was doing a training exercise in this hotel / apartments, because I know that the Barclay can be rented out to film projects, to TV shows. It could be leased to, different organizations. And it turned out that the Los Angeles firefighters were actually using this for training exercises. It turned out that Kelly Wong had fell to his death during a training exercise at the hotel. And that was the last reported death to date at the Barclay, which I'm just I mean, another freak accident. Is it history repeating itself?
One of the things that we talk about in our noir episode about downtown Los Angeles that's really fascinating is there are two streets, but one is used more than the other, and I think it's third, but there's a good 3-block section of buildings that can still be used to film period pieces from the 30s and 40s because none of the buildings have been changed. All they have to do is go in and change the signage or digitally erase the signage, but it's still all physically there. And this is great about how the economy is coming back, certainly in California. California is rocking its economy right now. We have so much growth, and there's not a single soundstage available in Southern California right now because so many things are being filmed. And as I drove to work yesterday from teaching, there was a film crew outside the Barclay filming.
Oh, wow.
With, trailers everywhere. So I love seeing that. I love seeing that like these historic buildings are preserved in that way. And you know what? Everybody needs to be housed in a responsible and ethical way. And, I think LA is headed in the right direction trying to do that. But it's a complex issue because I'm sure we always get people that want to chime in from other parts of the country about what's going on in Southern California. I'm like, come out here and we'll show you how complex it is. It's not an easily.
That was the thing that was so crazy during this like farce of a recall. Not to be super political, but I'm going to do it anyway. But like so many people who don't live in California, and I've only lived here 10 years, so it's like my understanding is even very limited. But so many people from other states, frankly, states that are not doing that well right now. Like no shade, but like your state in the ranking of the 50 is very low. And you're going to talk about California when like Los Angeles is like the 7th biggest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're going to like chime in with your opinion. Like, well, we're good. We're really
stay
good
in your
on
state.
That.
Stay in your lane.
That's good. Thank you. We're so good. Like,
we've got the best crimes and ghosts anyway. So
the best crimes, the ghosts, the history, everything, coffee. So.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I will say one last thing about that, Bryce. Is like now that farce of a recall is over, I'd like my money back. I'd like my taxpayer money back that was wasted on that.
Just such a waste. So you're speaking
35
about, like,
million.
There is there's a housing crisis in this city and in this state, and it's just like, again, I'm not really trying to be super political, but it's just very frustrating that like we're still in a pandemic, there's still a homeless crisis, like we're in a drought, the state's on fire. Like I can think of many reasons to spend $300 million. I could go and just get coffee for that. Like, honestly, there's just so many things that could have been done that are positives instead of like, let's recall. I don't know. It's just such a mess. Like, people really ultimately do hate being told no. And that's just what it really comes down to is like, don't tell me no. Don't tell me that I can't do every single thing that I feel entitled to. It's like, what? I'm sorry.
People feel very, very powerless right now.
Yeah,
they're trying
understandable.
To get it back in ridiculous ways.
But I would also like my money back. So
yes, you do want our money back. Well, speaking of the word no,
transition.
We're going to go into the paranormal aftermath of this hotel. I just want to say that it was very difficult to find stories. I do have one that surfaced by the grace of God. I brought up J.M. Moore's book, The Barclay Hotel, which is a great read. Moore really goes in depth with the newspaper articles, research, and history, and even the crime of the hotel. Moore also puts their personal anecdotes in regards to like the building and what they think of the history of the building. So Moore lived in this building of the Barclay from 2007 and then moved out for, I think in 2012 for personal reasons. It wasn't the ghosts, but towards the end of Moore's book, they described the experiences of living in the hotel as wonderful and also with supernatural experience and spiritual elements to it. There's a lot of ghost stories attached to that, and Moore and I have been in contact because I wanted to get a ghost story, at least one from Moore, and unfortunately I couldn't get that. So that was the power of no right there.
Yes.
Buy the book, people.
Buy the book. So he is currently working on a book, a follow-up of just the ghost story. So it's going to be a second part to the Barclay, where it's just going to focus on the Paranormal Association, which I'm really excited about because I'm really curious.
That's great.
More. Yeah. So, I thought it was a really cool thing that Moore, made this first book, just focusing on the history, provided with support of articles and research that he did. in regards to the crimes and the deaths connected to the building, and his personal experiences along with the films and shows that were shot there. So my question to him was, can you at least tell me if W. Arthur Phipps and his poor dog Teddy still roam the halls of this hotel? So for those who are not familiar with W. Arthur Phipps, he was a very wealthy elderly man who actually kind of lived in the hotel throughout the last years of his life. He was a bit of a recluse. In a way, they called him the ghost of the Van Nuys Hotel, aka Barclay, because he, sequestered himself in his living quarters. He was in fear of the Black Hand. He felt like people were out to get him and his money. And unfortunately, in 1911, he passed away of cirrhosis. But before his passing, Teddy, his dog, was also killed in front of the hotel. I think it was... Yes, the poor dog was, I think he was in the way of marble that was on top of a truck, and it kind of crushed him to death. I could be wrong. I would have to go back in my research, but I know that Teddy did die on the property of the hotel. And is it possible that Teddy and Phipps roam the halls? We're going to have to find out based on J.M. Moore's second book of the Barclay and those stories connected.
And Teddy had his own headstone made for him.
Yes, he had a custom casket, and they were taken to Phipps Ranch for burial. So it was such a sad story to hear about Phipps and his dog Teddy. But my biggest question is, do they roam the halls? So I contacted the hotel to ask to speak with the site manager, only to have a date and time scheduled. And then soon, when that date and time arrived, I was greeted with the message that the site manager was suffering from COVID and wasn't able to do an interview. But his assistant was able to answer any questions that I had. And we were going to postpone the interview for, I think, within the next 2.5 weeks. And I said, no, actually, we have to record this episode this Saturday. Can you at least share with me any personal experiences of the paranormal, any ghost stories you might have, things that have occurred to you that you've witnessed that were unexplainable? And I quote, and I wrote this down. This is according to him. I quote, "I have had a few experiences here that I don't wish to have posted in a newspaper or on the radio," referring to the podcast. "All I can say is that I've experienced things here that are very personal and unexplainable." End quote. So in some vague way, I feel like he was saying there are things here that we cannot explain that it happened, but I don't know if he's confirming that the hotel, aka the apartments of the Barclay, are haunted. But
sounds like it to me.
It does. But there is one listener who messaged me a while ago when they saw us post about the Barclay. She messaged me. She didn't want to use her name. She said that she had an uncle who was working security for one of the shows that was being shot there. It's a TV show.
Small world.
And yeah, it was a very small world. So when the show wrapped, according to her uncle said that he was doing his final walkthrough after everybody left to make sure that no one stayed behind, that everything was locked up. And he heard what sounded like commotion coming from one of the floors. He went to go up and investigate, and he saw a shadowy figure. And at first he thought it was someone from the crew, probably picking up something or maybe just wandering around. But he noticed that 1, he didn't hear footsteps, and 2, he could kind of see through the shadowy figure. So that was something that, is unexplainable. And from what I've read in other blogs, people have, experienced doors closing on their own and the typical flicker of the lights. So like J.M. Moore stated in the email to me, we're just going to have to wait for this book and, his accounts of what occurred in the Barclay.
So when we were doing our walking tour, we stopped across the street from it, and our guide was telling us some of the stories, and there was like a big bay, like maybe where they get deliveries, and sporadically these lights would start flickering in the bay. And it was so creepy because it was, it's kind of like this tunnel, and we would say like, "Oh, the light's flickering." And then he would turn around and it would stop. And then he'd start talking again, and then the lights would start flickering, like a big light from inside this delivery bay. So it was kind of fun. I mean, it's probably maybe it's a site manager just fucking with us. He's like,
who knows? They were very nice. They were very, very sweet. The first guy I spoke to was a security guard, and he gave me the info for the site manager. And then I spoke with the assistant. They were all sweet. But yeah, it just, I guess, like, you know, when we talked about earlier, especially with like trauma and the paranormal, like this is something that is so personal and so private for them that, you know, it's just, they revisit their trauma again. So I totally understand, you know, with not wanting to share, and I definitely wanted to respect that. I believe there is one legend that you guys did bring up before about the headless bellhop. So supposedly there is a legend of an apparition of a headless bellhop that has been seen primarily around the elevator area. On, I don't know in what type of floor, I think probably the second or third floor, but there is a legend that people have seen an apparition of a bellhop or a headless bellhop, which is interesting because, as I mentioned before, with the freak accidents, nothing was stated that any of the bellhops or raiders lost their head in these freak accidents with the elevators. I know we just had that poor gentleman, his skull was crushed, but other than that, who knows who that is. So,
or it could be sort of a portmanteau of different stories that have been blended together and, you know, become sort of myth by now.
Absolutely. It could have been like something that was watered down. So who knows? I'm sure that there is some activity. I know that based on J.M. Moore's book, there's this little snippet where he discusses where he was looking at rooms with the manager. He saw one room on one floor that gave him good vibes. And then when he went to, I think it was the second or third floor, he went to go see this other room. He was like, I just had this gut feeling of no, there's something here. And I just didn't want to be a part of it. So I went with the first room. And it was kind of funny because the freak accidents happened in between the second and the third floor.
Oh, right.
So Lord knows what kind of residue was left behind because of those accidents with the elevators and the bellhops. But it's so traumatic that it could have left something there, a residual energy.
Scott, are you broadcasting live from inside the Barclay right now? Can you just go to the second floor and let us know?
It could be.
Please don't take the elevator. Please take the stairs. Thank you.
Yes.
That's like this is like the best Zoom background I've ever found.
It is. I'm really jealous.
The web really quick.
I'm really jealous here. I feel like I'm in like an OnlyFans, like at my bed right here.
Yeah.
Hey.
Well, you gotta blur the background.
Hollyweird.
Hey, no. If you're gonna eat that pickle, get really close to the mic, Tammy.
Oh my gosh. Oh my god. This is a Christian podcast. Wow. How dare you?
Well, guys, that was a brief history of the Barclay Hotel and its True Crime and Paranormal Association. Once again, check out J.M. Moore's book, The Barclay Hotel, and look out for his second edition, which will include paranormal stories, his accounts of what it was like staying at the Barclay during the time that he was living there, and also the accounts of others who worked there while he was living there. So look out for that. A shout out to him. And thank you for being a tease. More.
Why don't we just go rent a room at one of those places and stay there for a while, and then we can write our own book, and then
there we go.
We need to all go to the Lizzie Borden house.
Oh my god,
because it's a bed and breakfast now. I would love that. Rent the whole thing out for the night.
Are they still selling it? They haven't sold it, huh?
Oh yeah, it was up for sale. Both of the houses, where the murders occurred, and then where she moved to.
Yes,
were both
Maple Cross. Yeah, that one. Yeah, that one is still up for sale. The Conjuring house is for sale as well.
That's right.
I saw that.
Island. Yeah, so it's pretty sad for a lot of people, and I want to state this because I know that people want to run with the story, but the Heisens and their daughter Madison posted videos why they're selling the house. It has nothing to do with the paranormal. It's because partially that it emotionally, mentally, and for personal reasons they had to sell. It had nothing to do with spirits making them sick or pushing them over the edge. Actually, if you listen to other interviews with them, the living were far more worse than the dead.
I bet.
They were experiencing people breaking in and still breaking into this day onto the property. So it took a toll on their stress. They're like, what the hell's going on? So yeah, that locations being is still listed on Redfin and on Zillow for 1.2 million. They are hoping that it goes into the right hands. Good. I'm thinking we could do a really, really nice big bake sale in Beverly Hills, and we could
okay.
We could go ahead and purchase it. Take care of it.
Pool our assets.
And once more, guys, October 9th, we'll have our meet and greet at the NBC Bar and Grill. And here's where we're going to do our plugins. So please follow Hollyweird Paranormal on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram at Hollyweird Paranormal, and on Twitter at HWP Podcast. We have a website, which is www.hollyweirdparanormal.com. And LA Not So Confidential, you want to do your plugins?
Sure. We do not have a TikTok because we are old.
I would love to see Scott do a dance.
Yes. No, you wouldn't.
Actually, Scott is thinking about his own ideas for TikTok. Technically, I have an account, but it's just to watch my kid on hers. Yeah. And she adores you, Tammy. This is more for an offline conversation, but she would love to meet you. But you can find us on the big three. Instagram, we're at LA Not So Podcast. On Twitter, LA Not So Pod. And then, of course, we're on Facebook with LA Not So Confidential. And we have a brand new website that we just got zhuzhed up. It's beautiful. It has every collaboration we've ever done. There's links to it, so you can find more Hollyweird Paranormal content there. But it's LA-so-confidential.com. It's our name with dashes in between each word. And we would love to have any of you folks who have not come over and tried us out. Please come on and try us out. Thank you, guys. I mean, I guess Lizzie Borden is the last collab we did last year. So this was great. Great timing. Can't wait to see you guys in person.
Yes, can't wait to see everyone, all your beautiful faces, come and share a drink with us and some mozzarella sticks and some fun scares as we enter the park. So thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Bring comfortable footwear.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Better footwear.
Absolutely. Pay attention to our social media. We'll put all the details up there for that.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Stay Hollyweird Paranormal, and we'll catch you very shortly within the next week or two with our next episode. We'll be doing Haunted School. So stay Hollyweird, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye, folks.